Hi guys, welcome back. Another security stories for you. This time I'm going to be talking about girls in clubs, and hopefully I'm going to give some of the young guys some tips of all the stuff I noticed, because most guys go to clubs in order to get with girls, and funnily enough most girls don't particularly go to clubs in order to get with guys, certainly not on the night anyway. So I'm going to go through some of the stuff I saw happening, why it wasn't working out for these guys, how maybe you can do things differently to get better results than the guys that I was seeing, and also a couple of stories maybe on the darker side of some of the behaviour that I saw exhibited by girls in clubs. And I should start by saying I'm not picking on girls here, because I've made lots and lots of videos of the horrific behaviour of men in clubs of various different kinds, of all different religions, races. You know, I'm not singling any people out here. The fact remains that clubs are kind of a filter for some of the worst behaviour, and it filters it in because a lot of unpleasant people are drawn to the nightclub industry, and of course then you add alcohol, you might add some drugs and whatever else. It's not a recipe for maybe a successful night a lot of times, and often it's not a recipe for finding the brightest and nicest people on the planet. You will always find quite a few in there, but the majority of people in clubs are normally drunk and pretty belligerent. Anyway, I digress. So let's start on the topic of guys trying to pick up girls in clubs. Most of the guys I saw, they went into clubs and their behaviour was all based around picking up a girl on that exact night, and that's a big problem because the girls were going into clubs generally as part of a larger group of girls, and they were going there to have a dance, to have a great time with their mates, to have a bit of a laugh. What they weren't going there to do was generally to have sex with a guy in the toilets, or to go back to some strange guy's house that night and have sex with him there. Of course that does happen, but that tends to happen with either girls that are incredibly drunk or girls that aren't maybe the nicest possible people and have got some issues themselves. And you have to ask yourself, is that really what I want to let myself in for? If I go to a club to find a prospective partner, yes, I might be kind of aroused that night and want to find someone to get off with or whatever, but do I really want to be entering into a relationship whereby that person is a little bit deranged and it isn't going to go very well? If you want to find a crazy woman, then go to a club with the idea of picking someone up that night and taking her home that night, and the girl that says yes and goes with you is either completely off her head or she's a red flag and she's going to be totally mental and she's probably going to do all kinds of terrible things to you. So firstly, there's that. Don't go there with the idea of getting a girl that night. But does that mean that clubs are a bad place to pick up girls? No, because like I said, lots of girls go there. They generally go in groups. They're there to have a dance and a good laugh. So I would see successful guys go in there, especially if they could dance, because that was the first way. You know, if you can get on the dance floor, you didn't even have to be a great dancer. You just need to be prepared to dance and kind of don't take yourself too seriously. There were guys that were really good dancers that took themselves seriously, but I mean, they were really good dancers. And then there were guys that really couldn't dance. I mean, I can't, so you know, I'm one of those. But if you took yourself onto the dance floor and you kind of messed about, you know, kept a smile on your face, danced a bit silly, didn't mind people kind of laughing at you and whatever, the girls would generally dance with you because you're a non-threatening guy, you're having a laugh, you're joining in with what they're doing, which is having a little bit of fun, and then, you know, you can go back to the bar with them, you can share a couple of drinks, buy them all a round of drinks. That's a lot less intimidating to a group of girls. If you've danced with them, shared some kind of funny moments, and then you say, hey girls, do you want a drink? And you buy them all a drink, that's not intimidating, right? If you're some kind of creepy guy that's staring over from the bar like a lot of dudes do, they sort of sit there and stare at these girls and then they walk over and go, oh, who wants a drink? The girls are often a bit taken back and they're like, whoa, you know, who's this guy? He hasn't even introduced himself, he's trying to buy us drinks. And they're going to start to think, well, this guy thinks he's going to sort of buy his way into bed with one of us, and that's a little bit offensive. So that doesn't tend to work so well. Sometimes it can work if you just send the drinks over. You know, if you're at a little bit of a posher club and you're kind of on private booths or tables and you say, hey, I want to send those girls a round of drinks, and you send them over kind of tip them a wink and then go over a bit later and introduce yourself to them. That can be a pretty good intro section. But again, don't be thinking that you're going to make any serious groundwork that night. The best way to play it is just to make friends with these groups of girls. And that's why a lot of people would say, well, how did the doorman get all the girls? We were there every week. So these groups of girls would come in, they would talk to us, we would have a laugh with them, you know, we would sort of make some jokes, we would remember their names, we would have a little bit of to and fro, a bit of banter and all that. And over time you would become friendly. And if the banter was not kind of brother and sister banter, but there was a little bit of a flirty nature to it, because if you banter with a girl and it's very clear that there's like no flirting at all, you end up in the friend zone, right? You know, we've all been there, that you think you're developing like a really good friendship that could lead on to something. That's certainly how they show it in the romantic films. And a lot of the time, if you leave that too long, the girl turns around and goes, whoa, you know, that's a bit weird. I didn't think of you like that. I think of you more like a friend or a brother. It's quite rare that you can have that over a long period of time and turn that into something romantic. So if you like that girl and you want to get something going with her, then have the friendly banter, but kind of give it a little bit of a flirtatious vibe as well, to let her know that that's the way that you're thinking. So we would do all that, and then, you know, we would sort of dance with the girls or whatever after hours, and then of course things would develop. So it wasn't like doormen would just walk up to girls and go, oi you know, do you want to come back with me? It was after weeks and weeks of generally meeting these girls, helping them out. You know, if they were in trouble, we were ringing them a taxi home, driving them home, not wanting anything from that, because that's another thing guys do, is that they'll offer a girl a lift home, but then they think that she's like directly got to give them a kiss or something at the end of that. It's like a business trade the way that guys see it, and that's pretty offensive, you know, and it's deeply unpleasant and kind of intimidating. So I would just pack that in. That's never going to work. You actually need to be friendly, and that's the biggest advice that I can give, is that go to the club with the aim of making friends with some people. You know, it doesn't have to be girls or boys. You just go there with an aim of having a good time, making some friends, and then you will find that everything falls into place, because you will meet girls and boys. You'll make friends with them all, because you might meet a mixed group that's got girls and boys in it. Be friendly to all of them. And then you might find that one of the girls and you get on really well, and over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, when you keep bumping into each other and you start texting each other, that's when a good relationship can develop. I saw a lot of times, you know, if there was mixed groups, there would be animosity. Like the guys would go over and be kind of abusive to the guys in the girls group. Of course, the girls are going to then be defensive. They're going to think you're a complete arsehole because you're going over and trying to be all macho in front of the guys that they're with. Most girls don't appreciate that, this like alpha male strutting, peacocking bullshit that guys do. That is just generally quite unpleasant. You have to be incredibly cool to carry that kind of thing off. Maybe if you're Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse kind of cool, you might be able to carry something like that off, but you're still going to come off like a complete arse, let's be honest. No one really likes a dude that kind of comes over and starts taking the piss out of everyone in the group. I've also seen that the other way around, that I've seen some really nice guys approach groups of girls, and there's some groups of girls that are just like the mean girl groups, you know, that can be pretty bitchy, and a guy will go over and say hi and introduce himself and be really nice, talk to them, and they will just take the piss out of him, absolutely savage him, and he will leave completely red-faced. So don't be surprised if that happens either. I would also say that I've seen that happen, and the guys that were able to take that, you know, they took a bit of grief off the girls. They didn't take it too seriously. They had a laugh. They went back a bit later. They kind of tried again, still messing about, keeping things really smiley and happy. That eventually they did manage to like befriend these groups of mean girls. And I think in a way some of those groups of girls were doing it as a sort of test of like, if we push this guy away a little bit, you know, is he going to come back? Is he legitimate? Is he just after us for tonight, or is he going to come back next week and be friendly to us then? So it could be a little bit of a test that you might have to pass in order to kind of get with these girls in the first place on a friendly basis. Now these days guys also have to be very careful, because times have changed, and everything you do is going to be under a spotlight in terms of like trying to get girls, dating with girls in clubs. There's huge issues related to that. And it works both ways, because obviously there's a huge danger for girls. You know, there's the culture of maybe spiking drinks. There's the culture of girls getting incredibly drunk and guys trying to take advantage of them. And I'm sorry to say that was kind of a thing when I was doing the doors. You know, it was considered almost normal by society that guys would ply girls with lots of drinks so that the girls were more affable to them. And that is now rightfully considered a very, very bad idea, because you could end up actually on charges for that. You know, if she's so drunk she doesn't know what she's doing and you take advantage of her, you may well end up in court, and you would probably deserve it, because that is a scumbag move. So don't be doing that. Nothing wrong with buying people a couple of friendly drinks, but if you're like putting extra shots in there or just sort of forcing it down a girl's neck, or even if she's got herself really drunk, the nicest thing you can do is either try and get her linked back up with her friends or get her home safely. What you don't want to be doing is trying to get off with her, take her into the house or take her back to your house where she doesn't even know what she's doing, and then in the morning she wakes up, can't remember anything, and she's like laying in a bed with some dude that she doesn't even know. Of course you're going to end up in trouble from that. Even if you didn't end up in trouble, you're not going to feel good about that. It's an awful move to play. But that was a common practice back then. But also I've seen it the other way round. I've seen plenty of times that girls have kind of gone off with guys. The girl hasn't been particularly drunk. She's gotten off with a guy or multiple guys, and then she's turned around and kind of made accusations at the guy. We had lots and lots of false accusations made in clubs where girls would get annoyed with a guy for some reason and then say, oh, he groped me up. We would check the CCTV, and in fact everything she had said was a complete nonsense. And one would hope that that never got any further, because we had seen with our own eyes that what she was saying was a straight up lie. But a lot of those things do go further. You know, it can ruin people's lives, that if you're going off and copping off in a club with some girl that's a bit of a red flag, but it seems okay at the time, and then she says something else the next day because you didn't answer her text or whatever, you could end up in court. You could end up with, you know, people thinking there's no smoke without fire. You might lose your job. If you've got a high profile job, for example, you could be absolutely ripped apart in the media. I've seen this happen with celebrities, sports team guys, you know, people that play football, rugby, have come into clubs. I've seen it personally where they've made some really bad choices, gone and gotten off with a girl, and then the next day the girl didn't get a reply from her messages. You know, she wanted to meet again. The guy says no because he was only in it for a one-time thing. She then turns nasty and throws it all back at him. So both parties can be pretty dark in those respects. Guys can be quite predatory. Girls can be pretty vengeful when they don't get their own way. So they've both got kind of an unpleasant playbook that you've got to be really, really careful about. So if you're a girl, be careful of predatory guys. If you're a guy, be careful of vengeful girls. And this all comes back to making those sensible decisions. If you go to the club in the first place and you go there with the idea of making friends, taking your time, meeting people week by week, maybe going out and having a coffee with that person if you get on really well, you're going to avoid all this stupid stuff. You know, the way not to avoid it is to go to a club thinking, right, I'm going to get a girl home with me tonight. And I used to see guys in the queue, they would all be saying to each other, I'm going to pull tonight, I'm going to take someone home. They'd not met this person, you know, it would be the first night they've met, and they think they're going to take this person back home to bed. What kind of girl do you seriously want to meet that says yes to that on the first night? Probably not the girl that you're going to take home to your mother and introduce as a prospective long-term relationship. So that's pretty much doomed to failure from the start. And this brings me on to probably one of the darkest stories I have about door work. I employed a guy, really, really good doorman, pretty good with his hands, in fact very good with his hands, really tough guy, and very, very switched on, very sensible. And one time I had a bunch of other guys come to me from another door down the road, and they said, look, we've heard you're employing this person. We don't like it because we've heard he's a pedo. And I was like, what? You know, it doesn't make sense. And they said, yeah, he's been banged up for it. You know, we're not happy about it. We're disgusted that you're employing him. I said, well, this is the first I've heard of it, guys. So I'll, you know, make some inquiries and I'll get to the bottom of this, because it could be a rumour. And they said, no, it's not a rumour. It's 100% true. So I say, fine. This guy turns up. We had a great relationship, me and this guy. He didn't seem that kind of person at all. So I was straight with him and I said, look, cards on the table. This is what's being said about you, that you've got some kind of sex offence under your belt. You know, you've done a bit of time for it, and I'm very concerned about that, obviously, if it's true, because, you know, I've got a club full of young ladies and young men here, and I can't have that kind of thing mixing together. So he was straight with me, and he admitted that actually this had happened several years ago, and he had worked a club whereby, you know, it was a busy club. A couple of girls were coming in on the regular. Now, they were supposed to check in at the door and provide ID. He worked on the inside of the club, so he always presumed everyone that came in there had showed some ID. Now, these two girls were absolutely gorgeous looking, had all the right things in the right places, full faces and makeup. They used to come in tiny little mini skirts, little crop tops, both stunningly beautiful. And it was a regular occurrence that these two girls would do like lesbian acts on the stage. I don't mean like writhing around, but they would be like dancing with each other, putting their hands all over each other, kissing each other, like deeply kissing each other. They would do that kind of thing in front of the doorman as well, and specifically they would do it in front of this door guy. So he's got these two girls that would be constantly coming in the club week after week, and they would be all over each other, and they would be basically sort of saying, hey, I bet you wish you could join in, or we'd love you to do that. And he was thinking, Christ, you know, this is great, as most blokes would, right? So he assumes, yeah, everything's normal. I've got these two really pretty girls on my case, and kind of cheered his night up a little bit. So it gets to around Christmas time. These two girls turn up, again, both looking absolutely drop dead gorgeous. They've both got on little red and white Christmas dresses, like with the Father Christmas white fluffy stuff on it, and you know, dresses like so short they're basically, the knickers are showing underneath, boobs poked up in like wonder bras and whatever, so looking stunning. And the same thing happens, you know, they get into the club, they're dancing in front of my mate, and they're literally all over each other, hands everywhere. And then they're basically saying to him, we want to come back, you know, we want to get with you tonight, and we want you to come back with us. And he thinks, great, this is amazing. You know, I'm like, I think he was in his late 20s at the time, and he thinks, I've pulled these two absolute stunners, and he goes back with them, doesn't think any more of it. So he wakes up the next morning. One thing he does notice when he wakes up in the cold light of day, he thinks, wow, they've got a very big house, these two girls. You know, what's two girls like this doing in a sort of huge detached house? But he thought it was kind of odd, didn't think much more of it. He goes home. Thank you very much. He's had a good time. They say, yeah, great. You know, they've had a good time. They're still messing about and frolicking around on the bed and whatever. So he thinks literally no more of it. 2 weeks later, he gets a knock at the door. It's the police. So the police turn up at his house and they say, right, we want you to come down the station, we're going to interview you. So he doesn't know what this is about. He thinks maybe it's about like a phrase that's happened in the club where people are kicked off and he's throwing them out. So he goes to the police station. And this is regular occurrence. If you did door work back then, you were constantly being invited down the police station to talk about some incident or rather that had happened. He gets down there and the police say, right, we have reason to believe that you've had, you know, sexual relationships with some underage girls. And he says, well, no, I would never do that. Then they put out these two pictures, and sure enough, it's these two girls. And he said, well, that can't be true. You know, they've been coming in the club for like over a year. They are regulars in there. They've obviously showed ID to get in, and they were basically getting me involved. You know, they were coming in and doing all this stuff, and I eventually submitted to it, but I certainly wasn't, you know, predatory. I wasn't kind of going for them. And the police were like, yeah, sure. Anyway, this all ends up going to court. When it gets to court, So his solicitor has advised him at this point. He had a duty solicitor, which every time I hear people have got a duty solicitor, I've got my head in my hands, because those guys are going to do the cheapest, most efficient, convenient thing for them, because they're on super low pay. So please get yourself a decent solicitor if anything like this ever happens to you. But his duty solicitor says, well, you know, you're kind of banged to rights. You've admitted that you did things with these girls. The girls are underage. I think they were both 15, basically, coming up for 16. And that's it, you're done. So he takes the solicitor's advice, and the solicitor says, you know, if you plead guilty, we can sort of throw all this other stuff in, and I don't think you'll get a custodial. So he pleads guilty. The two girls have turned up in court. And what people don't understand is when you plead guilty, you get very, very limited ability to kind of say anything for yourself. You get a few words at the end, but you don't get to tell your whole side of the story. To do that, you need to go not guilty and say exactly the events that happened, so that you can demonstrate you didn't knowingly do something, you know, that there were other events that were beyond your control that led to this thing happening. The girls are in court with their mums and dads. Turns out the mums and dads are like counsellors, you know, they're quite wealthy, they're quite religious. The girls are there wearing these like demure, like full-length skirts, looking like they just come from Sunday school. They also looked very young because they had no makeup on. They looked completely different to the two girls that this guy remembers from the club. They looked nothing like that. And as we all know, girls can make themselves look dramatically different with makeup and push-up bras and God knows what else. So a warning to you guys, you know, be careful what you're doing out there, because there are girls like this around that will put out a persona of one type and it will be completely adverse to the persona that they've got at home. They present their case, basically the prosecution, as two demure, poor young girls that were like rabbits in the headlights, caught out by this predatory man that had sort of groomed them over a period of weeks. And by the time it got to the point where he could give his bit, you know, a bit at the end where he gets to say a few sentences before he gets sent down, you know, everyone in court has clearly already made their minds up that this guy is an absolute monster and should be sentenced to a long period in prison. Sure enough, he got a period in prison. And I actually felt pretty bad for him. When he got there, it was leaked by the prison staff to everyone else in the prison, because all they had on him was, you know, what's written on a bit of paper that he's like some kind of nonce. So they then circulate that to the guys in the prison, and several people tried to kill this dude in prison. He was actually an incredibly skillful fighter, a very, very, very tough guy, I mean, way tougher than me. So he handled himself in there. He didn't get killed in there. He dealt with these guys and came out the other side of it, but it massively affected his mental health. And look, I'm not making excuses for people. I'm not talking about who's right and who's wrong here. I'm just telling you the story as I know it, and I had that verified by other sources. So this isn't like one guy making excuses. I spoke to other guys that were in that club that verified everything that was said, and there was even CCTV video evidence of these two girls frolicking around for weeks and weeks, but of course none of that got submitted in court because he went guilty. As soon as you go guilty, you lose the ability to submit all that kind of thing. So it just goes to show how careful you need to be. I saw only the other week Chris Eubank's son, you know, the famous boxer, his son was on some similar charges for some incident that happened down on a Brighton beachfront with a girl that turned out only to be 16, and it was pretty unclear who knew what about whose age, etc. And I don't know the ins and outs of that. He actually got let off with it. You know, they basically found him not guilty, which I'm glad if that was the case. But you cannot be too careful. You know, that I saw that loads and loads of times, that there were young girls getting into clubs that were acting a lot older than they were. And frankly, as doormen, we didn't know if a girl was like 15 or 25, because when a girl is 5'5", 5'6", made up to the nines, looking amazing with a tiny little short skirt on and her boobs poking all up, you're not going to know exactly what age she is. You have to kind of ID them. A lot of the times they will have fake ID. So you have to ask yourselves as guys, you know, you're playing like Russian roulette with that shit. you could end up on a sex offenders register for messing about with a girl that looks like the hottest girl on earth, and she's told you she's 18, 19, whatever, and in fact you find out that she's not even of an age that you should be doing that kind of thing. And there was loads of girls like that in clubs. The majority of those girls didn't make complaints. You know, they would blag their way into clubs with a false ID, they would have whatever relations with whatever guys, and it all got kind of washed under the table. And I would imagine that most of it came out if parents found out about it, and then it kind of got out of hand. But it happens a ton, so beware. The only other thing on the dark side I've got to report about girls in clubs is the state of the toilets. Oh my god, like, blokes' toilets are generally, they've got piss all over the floor and they smell of wee. Because men aren't very good at aiming when they're drunk, so they sort of wee everywhere. Some guys, like I've discussed in the other videos, they even manage to poo in the wrong place, you know, like miss the toilet, wee up the walls, all that sort of stuff. But girls take this to another level. I've never ever seen toilets more disgusting than the girls' toilets in nightclubs, where some of the foulest things you could imagine that would happen in a toilet have occurred. Blood smeared up walls, excrement smeared up walls, excrement used to write words on walls. Like, I've never seen the guys' toilets have that, but I've seen that a few times in the girls. So girls, I don't know what you're doing in those toilets, but it's really gross. Most guys will not have seen that because they don't have to go in the girls' toilets. We used to have to go in there at the end of the night to check, make sure everything was clear, and I would always be pretty much nearly sick when I walked in there, because it's one thing to have a bit of wee on the floor, but it's another thing to be confronted by a wall with poo written all over it and blood smeared up and down it. Why on earth they want to do that, I do not know, but maybe it was just the clubs I worked in were absolutely awful. Anyway, let me know down in the comments what your opinions are. How have you managed to date girls in the nightclub world? Or, like me, would you suggest that actually don't go to clubs to date girls because they're pretty awful places to meet anyone? That would be my advice now, but I realise when you're younger it's kind of nice to go into these. Don't forget, when I was in the clubbing scene and working in these places, there was not really any social media, so we didn't have the option back then to meet each other online and go on all these dating sites. It was literally that you went to clubs. They were like the equivalent of social media back then. So let me know how you've got on. Let me know if you've had any terrible experiences like this guy that I had employed, or let me know if you've had any great experiences and you met your wife. You know, you might be with someone now that you've been with for years and you both met in a nightclub. Be fascinated to hear. Also, guys, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate the subscriptions. All the views really help, but subscriptions really help boost the algorithm. I would really appreciate it if you did that. Thank you very much. Catch you all later.